Good afternoon, everyone. Those of us at Datacom share a common purpose of connecting people and technology to help communities and organisations to a better place. And so when we were asked to speak today, we thought really hard about what of our experiences and work we could share with a group of people like the people in the room here that might actually be of relevance to you and might inform you and be useful. What I'd like to do today is I'd like to talk briefly on three topics, and I'd like to draw a series of sort of common themes across them. I'm going to touch on the work that we've been doing in connecting with the open banking API work, and I'll show you our sort of what's live and what's really working for customers that we've got. I'd certainly like to touch on digital identity, as I think that you'll find increasingly identity is actually one of the most important conversations that we can have as a community here in New Zealand, and it sits right alongside payments as one of the important foundations. And I'd like to share a little bit about, if there were two words that were completely overused at the moment, transformation would be one and cloud is the other. They've been used in so many different ways that I think they've lost their meaning, and we've all got to get a lot more specific about them. But I do want to touch on what we've learned out of the largest cloud transformations that we've been involved in, and what I also think it means for New Zealand. And then there are some themes that come across it. I just touched on the one about sort of abuse of the word transformation. Everyone's got transformation going on, everyone's talking about it. It means many different things, and unless we're specific about what we mean by it, I don't think we communicate clarity within it. The second one is I think that cooperation has to come before competition. Now that might sound like an unusual statement from a commercial sector organisation like us, but in every one of these areas, the cooperation to efficiently, consensus is really hard. The question before about the open banking API, and is it too complicated, is it simple enough, how quickly can we get to it, is a really important one. Given the challenges in getting to consensus, what we want to do is cooperate as rapidly as we can, not be protectionist, and then allow the digital economy to flourish. And I'll talk about some of the opinions I've got and how I think it sits across all three of those. I also think that we must talk about how global trends play out locally. We definitely operate in an increasingly globalised world, but how it plays out in the New Zealand economy and in front of us is different, and with that difference comes potentially challenges for the entire country, but also comes opportunity. I think I should start with a little bit of history about how we actually got involved in the payment space. It came from an unusual direction. For about 10 years, we've been helping local and regional government organisations transform how they engage with their communities. And we've worked to enhance council operations and simplify their delivery to customers. And because change at the back office ERP space for local governments is a very challenging thing to do, what we did is we came at it from the front, deal with end consumer back. And so through the development of self-service portals and mobile apps, councils have enabled round-the-clock access to key services. We've freed up staff to work smarter and faster, turning what were long tasks into quick, streamlined and online processes. And to give you an idea of how widely adopted our offering is, over 60 councils are on the platform that we provide for that digital interaction with their citizens. One of the outcomes that all councils need is payment for goods and services. So as we deployed the self-service systems, we realised that councils needed to have much better control over the total workflow and the reconciliation of online payments, so we developed and implemented our own online payment gateway. It was kind of a logical thing to do. And our payment gateway was tasked with streamlining payments processing and related functions, and it's part of our core industry solution platform to the local government sector. Now, as we've continued to work with local government, we also learned something else important. Their end customer like the convenience of online payments, but they don't like having service fees added on, which is, of course, pretty much all of the public sector, because they want to offer the lowest price to the end customer, add service fees on, which impacts end users and slows the adoption of digital. Secondly, and as importantly, not all of them have cards to enable an online experience. So what that experience resulted in was the development of our Realtime debit product. Realtime debit is a new way for customers to make payments directly from their bank accounts without the need for a credit card or debit card. And we'd like to take you a little bit through our journey. We started the work with Westpac and integrated into their direct from account API into our payment gateway. Any solution platform that is integrated with the payment gateway, such as our local government platform Datascape, then has access to Westpac Bank, and their customers can just easily transact as they would for online payment types. Related functions such as reconciliation and reporting remain the same, which means less reconciliation effort and reduced cost of doing business online. And our first customer is live. And so Opotiki District Council went live 1 March, and they're using real-time debit, obviously only for customers who bank with Westpac at the other end, as payments for rates, infringements, dog registrations, water usage, sundry invoicing. What we also think, and I want you to think about the possibility of the customer experience. We really hope that the tokenization conversation in open banking is going to happen really quick. Imagine and not all people have easy access to, for example, an online platform. So imagine being able to get a text that says your rates are due, would you like to pay them? If you reply yes within the next 5 days, we'll add you the early payment discount. You can control when it is relative to when your salary goes in your account. You can say yes at the right moment. You don't need to touch a computer for it to happen. Those kind of innovations in customer experience and wider reach are directly enabled by things like the Open Banking API. We know at least 2 more of the major banks, I believe ASB and BNZ, are targeting this year to be available as additional back-end, and I just hope that we get as much progress as we can to enable that kind of customer experience innovation to happen. And that's not even talking about the potential benefits that may flow out of that in terms of the economy and cost of payments, which we're able to massively change under this kind of world. There's a second piece to this, which is, we've watched very closely what Australia did with BPay. Are most of the people in the room familiar with Australia and BPay? I figure you would be because you're in payments. Yes? Yeah. So the collection of data around the payment starts to become a much more important conversation, which is going to lead me into my next piece, which is talking about identity. In our mind, real-time debit fits within the move towards open banking, and we're really happy that the collaborative approach to creating the APIs. By being a development partner and seeing what other industry partners are doing, we see this as an example of a really good initiative playing out from the New Zealand market and one we can all benefit from. And we're working to bring pilots to market later in the year for any of the other banking organisations and other organisations that want to take advantage of the real-time debit functionality because we're in production. More than anything else, we've got a messaging gateway that sits alongside it. I think there are new forms of authentication possible. So the ability to interact with mobile phones is probably the biggest revolution that sits with it without even the data part of it. And the ability to introduce 2-factor authentication into the equation as well, which most people want by the time you've got to verified identity. So the biggest piece I want you to take out of all of this is it's here, it's now, you can take it live pretty easily. But there's a lot of collaboration rather than protectionism needed for us to really open it up. And if there was a big message I had, it's that with a lot of the value going out of ability to complete the transaction, the value is in the experience you can offer the customer and the value add you add around the transaction. And so every council that's already on our software as a service platform for their delivering with Citizen front end are just going to have that switched on and be available to do their payments at the point where they choose. Automatically enabled. It's just kind of a really good example of value add, and that's the kind of value I think you need to be adding around payments with richer data in order to carve out your place in the new economy. So having started to talk about that, I really must move on to digital identity. Our view is that one of the biggest limiting factors in moving to open banking will be how well we can deal with the issues of customer privacy and identity management. At the Digital Nations Conference 2030, which was hosted in New Zealand earlier this year, Westpac CEO David McLean claimed that the #1 problem in New Zealand is a lack of digital identity. Quite a big claim. While there are a range of solutions available in the market, not many are well aligned, I think, with the needs of consumers and organisations, particularly when it comes to the complexity of our AML legislation. So the key challenge is lack of ubiquity. Like the payments industry, digital identity only succeeds at scale once we've got widespread adoption for both customers and service providers. And it needs to be inclusive and available to all through use of highly available consumer technology, not proprietary, and also catering. We also have to leave a way to cater to individuals who don't adopt the new approach. And any of you who've been following the debate that's happening in the EU at the moment in a post-GDPR world as the banking sector and Facebook and Google are all sort of at standoffs with each other about who gets to see whose data, the realisation that global platform companies have an increasing view of payments, the organisations, the traditional organisations don't have that richness of view of the end customer that perhaps they do, means that the conversation around digital identity and data in a much broader sense than the transactional data but the richness of the customer who is there and their ability to manage their own data has to come onto the spotlight in this country too. So I'm not just talking about name and date of birth, but the vast data created by thousands of transactions that says what is personally relevant to the customer that you're dealing with. In the latest paper on the topic of digital identity, the World Economic Forum stated that we're on the threshold of a digital identity revolution. Across a range of sectors, digital representations of identity for people, organisations and things are fundamental to progress. In the humanitarian domain, the UN has initiated ID 2020, a project aimed at providing legal identity to all of the 1.1 billion people who are currently living with no way to engage with basic financial or social support services in their particular countries. While we don't have the significance of that issue to deal with in this country, not at that scale anyway, there are a number of ways that New Zealand can benefit from the establishment of ubiquitous digital identity ecosystem. Identity is, I think, the first step in every transaction between two or more parties. The role of identity is changing with customer expectations of far lower friction, seamless experience being absolutely top of their agenda. So identity needs to be solved through collaboration rather than assuming better tools and solutions will come from other economies, and a lot of deep thinking. New Zealand government has stated that it intends to work on an identity trust framework to help create the rules of the road for digital identity in New Zealand, and signalled its intention to co-create this with industry, agencies and end users. And I think that's a world-leading approach. I look at the number of prescriptive approaches that have been put out there in other parts of the world and met massive resistance and change, and I think that a highly cooperative approach like that has the greatest chance of success. Now, we've worked in the digital identity domain for somewhere in the region of 15 years and across a very wide range of government, department and corporate implementations to build a range of citizen and consumer identity. We've worked within RealMe, and I know many of you in the room will have a variety of different views around RealMe. However, it does over 1 million requests for more than 100 different government services every month. It's got over 400,000 verified identities in a new selfie-based onboarding process, and it makes great and rich use of government-held data. So I think that solutions like this have to be part of our ability to envisage a better outcome. We also had the pleasure to work with Immigration New Zealand on the Immigration Global Management System, and that was an initiative by Immigration to increase the number of foreign students and skilled migrants coming to New Zealand. Increasing the skilled working population of New Zealand is absolutely essential to us maintaining and increasing our GDP. And the historical paper-based system was too long, and more than anything else, we were losing really good candidates to Canada and Australia. As a result of the work we've done with government, the time it's taken to process student visas is reduced from 3 weeks to 3 hours. And we've worked with a range of private sector organisations on similar kinds of projects to create a single customer view. Trying to get a sense of how I'm going for time. Not too bad. With that work and experience we've also got a reasonable view, I think, of the challenges that we see ahead of us in identity. And to me, the current approach to identity identification, in most circumstances I've seen, is generally analogue, time-consuming and costly. While there are a range of digital identity solutions available, their uptake hasn't reached the level of ubiquity to add economic value to this country, or actually to reward end users with the kind of quality of experience they expect. So the goal of new solutions must be to unlock that value through reduced non-productive compliance spend, increased productivity through digitally delivered services, and create an environment for new digital-only businesses to flourish. Most of the people who live in this country, I think, are very receptive to the idea of sharing their information if they think there's benefit in it. Experience with Facebook and other social media, I think, has started to prepare us for the coming challenges. However, in the wake of the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal, it's really sensible that we implement further safeguards for end users and their data. And you just need to watch what's happening with the implementation of open banking in the UK and Europe as it's happening in the shadow of the GDPR to get a sense as to the kind of challenges that are going to come. While we've still maintained our adequacy status here in New Zealand, it may be wise for the government to consider the inclusion of many of the principles of GDPR not currently in our Privacy Act during the current update process that they're running. So mandatory data breach notification, data portability, user consent, the right to object, restrictions on automated processing, privacy by design, I could keep going, right? There are a series of really good examples of possible things that need to be considered as part of the revision of the Privacy Act to help keep us current from a fast-paced and fast-moving digital world. If there's one area that I don't need to emphasise to a room as experienced as this, it will be concern over data breaches and privacy and cybersecurity. It is one of the top topics in our world, and this is at the experienced end of any audience I'm likely to speak to this year. The only thing I will say about it is I think that there is a under-tapped opportunity for cooperation in the best interests of the company, as well as competition in the cybersecurity space. We actually all have common foes. And I do not see our cybersecurity experts as connected as they need to be working in our community to protect us against basically against crime, identity theft, the other issues that are being tackled. I also think that there's another factor that all of us need to think about. And it's, with all the data sharing possible, the number of organisations that I deal with that feel concerned at risk of disruption by new market entrants are just numerous. And the opportunity exists for financial service and payment service providers in an open banking and GDPR world is to look at the data currently held and then determine what new products and services can be provided to customers to compete with new players. We're all going to have a richer set of data available to us. I think attempting to protect it is only going to mean that global players get stronger. So what we've got to do is figure out how to cooperate for the benefits of the local economy. Every example I see suggests that existing providers have a substantial trust advantage, and I believe that's been talked about multiple times today, over new players. And they have the opportunity to create novel combinations to drive new value and to put sensible effort into data mining and artificial intelligence around recommendations to offer customized products. Only I think our progress to it is too slow, and we're kind of hampering ourselves rather than embracing that new world and chasing it as fast as we conceivably could. So what I'm really saying is I'd like to see the identity industry, like the payments industry, cooperating first and then allowing competition to happen at the end of it so that we make greater progress towards standards and an open way of working. Have I got as far as talking about Australia? No, I've kind of forgotten to skip my slides forward. Australia's committed substantial money to the problem. They're planning on spending billions in dollars, including 96 million in the next financial year, to work towards a single digital identity for citizens by 2025. Their goal is to save tens of billions a year, and it's very clear that they hope to learn their lessons from the poor uptake of the UK Verify offering and their effort to create that digital identity. What we see as the opportunity is helping New Zealand in our own way, and we helped establish the New Zealand Digital Identity Forum, which is a cross-industry collaboration working towards common principles, protocols and standards to enable a digital identity ecosystem for this country. Ahead of digital identity, Tim Ransom, who's here at the conference and you should grab and talk to if you've got an interest in this space, is currently acting as interim chair for the stewardship group because we're completely committed to that cause. Please take advantage of being at a conference like this and having this grouping of people together to start that conversation, and let's move the identity conversation forward through it. With the guidance provided by the government's Identity Trust Framework, we're hoping that out of the new Digital Identity Forum, there will be an interoperability layer agreed that can create the basis for an active digital identity marketplace in New Zealand. Just going to do a time check before I dive into the last bit. I'm getting pretty close to time, so I'm going to try and do this last one really quick. If there's another area that's been hugely confused, it's how cloud adoption plays into the world of transformation. Digital transformation, new payment system, new requirements for identity all require a vast amount of data storage, and without question, cloud data storage is where most forward-looking organisations are focusing. We've seen a huge uptake in cloud services from our New Zealand customers, both locally hosted ones and the use of the international global cloud platforms. IDC reckon that the current New Zealand cloud market's in and around 1.2 billion and growing at 20% compound annual, and will keep going that way through to about 2021. We're also seeing, and I think this is the most interesting innovation, we're seeing that innovative platforms of the global players start to flow back in New Zealand as providers like Microsoft take their competition to downsize it and figure out how to flow that kind of new platform back so that it can be hosted in country. We've also gained a ton of learnings out of the early large-scale migrations we've done. We've done a number of full public ones in Australia. We've worked extensively with government here, and there's a couple of learnings I want to share for you before I turn things open to questions. The most common result of a large cloud migration is that we end up with our customers having applications running across a number of different platforms and locations. These platforms often have different compliance certifications, security controls, monitoring capabilities, and service levels. Not only does it add to complexity, but anyone who can do the arithmetic will realise that if they're dependent on each other, the availability becomes the combined availability of all the availability multiplied together, which means it gets worse. So managing in that environment is quite complicated. The second factor that's under-talked about is just pure distance. We can't cheat the speed of light. Now, what I mean by that is the latency of the various cloud platforms that you're using is limited to the speed of light. And the distance from Western Australia to Auckland and New Zealand is 40% further than Seattle to New York, where they have many data centres dotting the middle of the United States in order to support their loads and deliver performance. Welcome to the world of hybrid cloud. We've been working in that environment for a while, and what I wanted to do was offer 3 recommendations of the work we've been doing. The first is to implement automation across the board. All of the customers who are succeeding in this space have aggressively chased speed and agility that comes from continuous testing, continuous deployment, automated failover and DR type activities. If you aren't working towards that, you need to be. The second is that DR and BCP is different in this world. You can't just assume it. If I look at the place where there have been single cloud node failures and organisations have gone out, it's because they haven't planned and managed and designed to work in that world. It is different to how it works in the traditional world. It's managed differently and you need to design your platforms for it. But the single largest bit of advice that I would be giving is design for exit as well as entry. How many of the organisations in the room have something that they largely regard as their boat anchor, their thing that they built upon and are struggling to change and transform and get away off? How many? We've got at least one and we're working on getting rid of it at the moment. All of you are far more modern or not willing to put a hand up. Honestly, I don't believe it, because every large institution I've seen with has something that maybe has an old licensing rules around its database. That'd be a really good one to focus on. I could keep going from there. There are dozens of them. And so actually considering how you will exit from these new platforms as you build it, the easiest answer is containerize. And so the new solutions can actually be shifted seamlessly between different worlds. Knowing that I'm getting to the end of my time, I think, I wanted to highlight a couple of customers that we're working with in this space, and then wrap up and allow for questions. We've been doing work with Ministry of Primary Industries, we've been doing work for MOTAT here in Auckland, and we've been doing work for ACC, and I think they're all really good examples of digital transformation, and they've been enabled, not delivered, but enabled by cloud platforms. In MPI's case, they've been able to greatly accelerate their border initiatives, moving from paper-driven processes to automated digital processes and providing information in real time. MOTAT's an interesting one. It's a very early adopter of Azure Stack. And so actually their Dynamics 365 instance, which is Microsoft's ERP platform, is now hosted in New Zealand, despite being a cloud one, on Azure Stack, local and close to where MOTAT wants to provide their availability. That's enabled them to do online customer engagement, ticketing, and an e-commerce platform to enable them to transform how they deal with their customers and offer far more targeted outcomes, particularly to schools, families, and tourists and Auckland ratepayers. And those of you who've dealt with ACC will realise that they're on a multi-year transformation to make themselves more customer-centric. It's meant a significant increase in project activity, and we've been deploying teams, very modern teams, working in a highly agile, continuous testing, continuous deployment way with them. That means that they now have the 5th largest presence in the Azure public cloud in Asia Pacific because of their incredibly rapid adoption of public cloud technology. And each one of those, I think, has accelerated their ability to go and chase after their goals and be more data-driven companies. So at the beginning of the presentation, and I think I've just completely forgotten to advance my slides, happens, I'd like to take you back to sort of a couple of key points and then open up for questions. I've touched on transformation in the payments industry, and including open banking, and I'd like to impress again what I think are the need for cooperation on the standards. Not an attempt to slow it down, but an attempt to accelerate interoperability to enable open banking to transform our country. And while there's some concern about the complexity of it, the reality is that actually we're up and running, and as more banks get into the back end, in our example, which is councils, more councils will be able to do it. We can easily see how we built there could extend to anyone who has a regular bill that needs to be paid or a regular transaction that needs to do it. It's by no means limited to local councils. And we've got the messaging gateway to enable you to jump even the digital world into the mobile phone world to do the transactions once you've established trust. We do need to up the dialogue about digital identity. Absolutely, identity sits at the heart of the payments industry, and we need a ubiquitous solution for verified identity if we want to enable particularly the new digital entrants to have a chance to compete. We spent some time discussing the issues of cooperation, and I hope we can learn from how things have played out globally and inform ourselves and make good decisions, both on long-running things like legislation that take a long time to change, and in terms of how and what we put in place for the country. You know, the examples I gave from the limited adoption of UK's Verify right the way through to Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and what we've got to do about GDPR in this country, I think we need to be proactive, not reactive. In cloud services, by far and away the biggest recommendation I can make to all of you is embrace automation. It's here to stay. It is a way of vastly increasing your agility. But do realise that it's likely to be for a very long period of time, potentially decades, that you're living in a hybrid world, and that there's a whole new set of skill sets. I remember the early days of the web, right? They talked about my days at Megabyte when they introduced me. So I remember when the web first started and everyone started adopting it, and I think the cloud world is at that early days of web maturity at the moment, and everybody's understanding about how to adopt it and get value out of it. And please do remember the advice about design for exit and don't get locked in again. You know, every one of us is dealing with it somewhere. If you think you're going to get locked in what you're doing, look really closely at how you embrace open standards and things that have enabled you to port to what you're building for the future. Hopefully I've tackled a couple of topics that resonated with a couple of people in the room. Do take the time to come and talk to my team and myself. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your opinions on these. There are two ways to look at these. You know, frequently when we deal with our customer base, people see challenge. Personally, I see opportunity, but the opportunity is if we embrace it and enable this change, not resist it. Thanks very much.